Welcome to our Red Hat Government Symposium's Executive Insight Series. I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and we're here today with Trey Vance, Public Sector Cloud Go-to-Market Leader with Red Hat. Trey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the things that are happening both in the open source community and here at Red Hat.
Absolutely. Well, let me set the stage a little bit. Where have you seen examples of, how the federal government has really looked to data to fuel digital transformation at their agencies?
There are a lot of examples, but one of the more pressing and timely actually is this effort around COVID-19, right? The work from home, the remote work, and ways of people collaborating from a lot of different environments. There's a tremendous amount of data to be found in that. There's a tremendous amount of insights to be gained. And we're seeing a lot of agencies start to develop models around things that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that for otherwise. So we're seeing a lot of innovation around data visualization, data management, things like data lakes and the concepts of lake houses and ways of going at full data instead of transforming data and then looking at that based on assumptions years later. We're now seeing people have whole sets of data and reanalyzing it with the fresh perspective that at the time they go to look at it, they have, as opposed to what they had before.
That makes sense. And yes, it is a kind of exciting time to be able to do that. Next, let me ask, how is open source technology playing an important, if not increasing role as the federal government faces critical challenges in general, but, like they did with COVID-19 and their response to that for the constituents?
So open source has played a vital role in the federal government's response to COVID-19, to the federal government's response to threats to cybersecurity. And what we've been seeing is collaboration between public agencies, between public institutions. So a great example of that is in the healthcare space, both with things like data modeling and building these open source models for both population, vaccination rates, any number of other pertinent pieces of public health information at the aggregate. We've been seeing open source being used. And that's very important because the open source community at the end of the day is a way for individuals to collaborate, to form remote teams. They're doing that naturally in the open source environment, and they've done that as a response to COVID as well. And then you see those projects being adopted by larger organizations like Red Hat, where we shepherd those communities, provide some structure and guidance, and then we contribute back to those communities using what we call an upstream first methodology. And so what that helps to do is to create a higher pace of innovation, because when we're solving problems at scale and then we're contributing back to the open source community, it makes everything better. So the lessons are learned as we start to iterate and add new features and functionalities to these projects. The projects go a lot faster. The projects don't have to do work to reverse engineer what we've done. So it is truly like an open and collaborative environment. And that's the power of open source, frankly.
Really interesting. And then kind of in a related topic, how does open source also enable better cybersecurity for agencies?
Right. So in a lot of ways, open source provides way more eyes on a library or a function or the software itself. So it's that same open source principle of sharing, collaboration, and reiterating at the upstream that allows cybersecurity to advance, because you're able to share practices within a community, you're able to iterate on those, and you see more than you would just at a proprietary organization. So our security and corporate security, we have methodologies, but it's great to be able to leverage hundreds of thousands or even millions of developers to be able to look at that and to iterate very quickly.
Hard to argue with that, that's for sure. And then lastly, Trey, what trends or technologies, particularly around open source, should federal agencies really be paying attention to, in the coming year or two?
Yeah, so kind of keeping on that same vein of open source security, I would say that there are things that allow for the visibility of security practices. So we've worked very closely with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, to work with them on their OSCAL language. So that was an open source initiative to document the security controls and the compliance stance of industry products. And so we've worked with them for a long time in being able to bring that visibility into the products that we have. There are other federal standards that are using open source, just like the NIST 853 has gone through a revision. FIPS is going through a revision. The FedRAMP Project Management Office has actually released guidance now on hardening Kubernetes. So Kubernetes itself, an open source project. And then Red Hat being with Kubernetes from day one, we've had insight into that, and we've been able to share what we've learned and work in a collaborative fashion with the FedRAMP PMO on that hardening guidance. So in a lot of ways, working hand in hand with the community, working hand in hand with these agencies to help to establish more secure frameworks are very important. Zero trust is another hot topic, and this idea of a software bill of materials. I think that that's vitally important in the open source environment, because you do want to know where your software bill of materials comes from, where each of the components like the logging or the service mesh, where all those things come from. And, particularly in Red Hat, being able to provide visibility into that and understand what the life cycle is for making that tested and trusted and more secure. Those are things that we see a lot of our customers are very interested in.
Absolutely. Well, Trey, Vance, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your insights with us about the evolution of open source in government and how that's helping agencies secure and better innovate in their respective roles.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.